been thinking about what we said in the last video. If God is defined by his names, and we look at the names, and we borrowed the names actually. I took 3 of the names that I see in the 99 names of Allah. Rahman, Ar-Rahim, Wadud, compassionate, merciful, loving. Just those 3 names. If God is defined by his names, and his names, those 3 names require an object. And that I can only see in the person of God, the triune God, 3 persons of God who have always loved, have always had mercy and compassion. And if we're created in his image, as we see in Genesis 1, 26 and 27, if we're created, then we also have compassion, mercy, and love. Then it stands to reason that we would also express that in the way we function as family, as community, as nations, and as people. And when you do a comparison between these two, when you have the Bible on one hand and you have the Qur'an on the other hand, here's the Bible here and here's the Qur'an. When you look at these 2 books, now I just suddenly realized my Qur'an is bigger than my Bible. I want to change that around. Let's come back to this one here. For those who don't understand, I did this a long time ago, and I'm always very careful that whenever I put the 2 side by side, I want people to realize symbolically which is more important. The Bible, when you get back and you look at the biblical view of God, and you look and see that he is exemplified it in sending his Son, and when you look and see that if we follow the example of that kind of God, and we exemplify it in our own lives, we exemplify it in our families, and we see that God, this God, sacrificed himself, comes down, limits himself, becomes a man, dies on the cross for us. There's that sacrifice. And if that is the image of God we see right through Scripture here, who has wooed us back to himself, who is then 2,000 years ago came and died on the cross for us, then it stands to reason that we would reflect that as well, made in his image. And so therefore it stands to reason now why when I look at the whole history of mankind, certainly the history of Christianity in the last 2,000 years, you will see example after example of people who do just that, who sacrifice themselves for others. They sacrifice themselves for other Christians and also for non-Christians. There have been many cases of martyrs right down through the ages, which then suggests then they are reflecting the imageness of God in them. Where do I find that here? Well, Muslims do tell me that people do sacrifice themselves, but look and see what they do. See, the God of the Bible sends his Son to die for me and for all of you, whereas the God of the Quran demands that his sons die for him. Now, which is the better form of love? God himself coming and dying for us, as we see here, or God sending his sons to die for him? Thank God I have this example, because that's the highest form of love, to sacrifice yourself, to give up your own life willingly, as it says in John 10:17, to give his life and take it back again, willingly to die on the cross, and while on the cross to say, God, forgive them, for they know not what they do, not even blaming them, because that was intended from the very beginning, right there from Genesis 3, verse 15, where God said that, returning to Eve, that someone from her line, a person, would come and destroy the head of Satan. That's the first prophecy we have of that very event. But that's the greatest, highest form of love, exemplified in the God of the Bible. Thank God we have that example. Thank God we have that model. And thank God as a Christian, therefore I exemplify it, therefore I model it, therefore I see examples of it right through my community, right through the whole history of Christianity. It makes sense because we follow the imageness of the God in us. And when I look at Islam and I look at the whole history of Islam in the last 1,400 years, a history of violence, a history of domination, a history of importing its own culture, eradicating every culture from before it, imposing itself, creating little Arabs all over the world in the way they dress and the way they talk and the language they use. That's not the imageness of God I see here. A loving God who comes and sacrifices, comes to our level, learns our language, lives amongst us, then dies for us. Wow! Thank God for the Trinity. Thank God for the triune God. Thank God for the fact that he did come and do that. And thank God it makes a whole lot of sense to me. This is Jay, over and out.